This is Jill Pack with the Seasons of Joy podcast. This is episode number 162, entitled Escaping the Box in Your Head. Welcome to this week's episode. Today, we are going to be talking about a concept that I think is going to change how you see your relationships. It's called being in the box versus out of the box, and it's not what you think. This concept comes from the book Leadership and Deception and the book The Anatomy of Peace. Both are written by the Arbinger Institute. And by the end of this episode, I'm hoping that you will have a new lens for understanding why some of your relationships feel stuck. So I want you to picture this. You're frustrated with a coworker who never seems to pull their weight at work. And you're building this case in your head about all the ways that they're failing and all the excuses that they make and how they are making your life so hard. You feel completely justified in your frustration. But what if I told you that in that moment, you are actually trapped in a mental prison of your own making? So let's define what the box is. The box isn't about creative thinking. It's about self-deception. The Arbinger Institute defines self-deception as being about how we distort our view of other people to justify our own behavior. So it works like this. Let's say you have a sense that you should do something for another person. Either help them, listen to them, apologize, have a conversation. Whatever it is, there's something you should be doing for somebody else. And then you choose not to act on that sense, that initial sense that you have. You've chosen to ignore it and betray what you know or believe to be right for this other person. And then since you've acted against your own sense of what's right, you need to justify it to yourself. And then you begin seeing this other person in ways that make your choice seem reasonable. They become lazy, or they all of a sudden become demanding or incompetent or unreasonable in your mind. And you've placed yourself in a box, right? You're starting to see others as objects rather than people. You're focused on being right rather than solving problems. So here's another example. Let's say you see a coworker and they're struggling and you feel like you should offer some help, but you walk quickly by them because you're just busy. And so to justify walking by them, you start thinking things like, well, they should just figure it out on their own anyway. And they're always asking for help. They're not really pulling their weight around here. And now you're starting to deceive yourself, right? You're seeing them as a problem to be solved, a problem person, rather than someone who actually just needed some assistance. Self-deception isn't about lying to yourself about your own flaws. Sometimes that's what we know as the definition, but it's actually about distorting how we see other people in order to protect our self-image as a good person. So here are some other things to know about this box. We are placed in the box when we deceive ourselves, but nobody else can put us in the box. We do it, right? When we deceive ourselves, we place ourselves in the box. Everyone has their own box, but we don't control other people's boxes. And our being in or out of the box has nothing to do with other people. It's our own self-deception. So it doesn't matter even that someone else is in a box. We have to focus staying on out of our own box, right? So here's an example. A few years ago, I had a friend and a colleague that I was doing business with, and I had a business decision that I needed to make that would affect this other person. And so my initial instinct was to call and have a real conversation about it. And the self-betrayal moment came when I chose the easier communication method of texting. instead, right? Which we all know causes all kinds of problems because there are nuances and tones that can be misinterpreted, right? So I betrayed myself in that moment because I had this idea that I needed to call this person. And then I decided to do the easier way, the path of least resistance, and do it through a text. And then mental justifications of why that was better immediately followed. I had all kinds of reasons why it just made sense to do it that way, right? And then that partner, that friend, that coworker, they shifted from being a person in my mind to a complication to manage, right? It sounds cold when I say it that way, but in all honesty, I'm trying to manage another person, right? And how did I know when I look back at this story and I reflect on how did I know that I was in the box? How can you know you're in the box? Well, it looks like minimizing, right? It's not that big of a deal. It looks like justifying. This situation doesn't require their involvement anyway, right? Or it looks like avoiding, choosing that path of least resistance. And it looks like objectifying, seeing that person as an obstacle rather than a person. By placing myself in the box, by deceiving myself, I made things between me and my friend worse. Things are better now and we've moved on, but I could have avoided so much pain and misunderstanding by honoring my first impression of having an actual conversation with my friend. This was a powerful lesson for me. So let's look at some other examples to kind of get your brain thinking. Let's look at marriage example, right? Let's say there's a moment you notice your spouse looks exhausted after a long day, and you feel like you should help with dinner cleanup. Well, the betrayal comes because you stay on the couch scrolling on your phone instead. And you start having in the box thinking that looks like this. I worked hard today too. They always expect me to just jump in and they're being dramatic about being tired. I did the dishes yesterday, right? All that justification is coming in. And then the result is your spouse does become demanding and never appreciative in your mind instead of a tired person who could use support, right? We shift the way we see them. They're no longer a person. So what would it look like if we were out of the box? You act on that initial feeling and you get up and you help. You see your spouse as a partner who's had a rough day and they deserve support. You focus on being part of the solution rather than justifying why you shouldn't help. Okay, here's another example in marriage. You're having a disagreement. You're in the middle of a disagreement and you sense you should really just listen to understand their perspective. The betrayal comes, the self-betrayal comes when you get defensive and you start planning your rebuttal in your head instead, right? And in the box thinking sounds like they're being unreasonable. They always blow things out of proportion. They never listen to me either. And then the result is that our spouse becomes this irrational and impossible to talk to person rather than someone trying to communicate their needs, right? Our perspective, our perception of them is created by our justification. What would an out-of-the-box alternative sound like? Well, you honor your impulse to really listen, right? You see your spouse as someone with valid concerns who's trying to improve the relationship. You focus on understanding rather than winning, which often leads to actual resolution, right? In my podcast last week, we talked about one of those essentials of, we don't need to win the argument. When we try to win an argument, we actually lose, right? In so many ways. So here are some examples around parenting adult children. The career choice. Let's say your adult child shares their career struggles and you feel you should just listen supportively, right? Just listen. The betrayal comes because you immediately jump into advice mode or criticism about their choices, right? You're trying to fix them. And you have thoughts like, They make poor choices. They're not realistic about life. They expect us to bail them out all the time. They don't appreciate our wisdom, right? All of that is in the box thinking. The result is, in your mind, your child becomes irresponsible and entitled instead of a young adult who is trying to figure out their path. So what would an out-of-the-box alternative look like? You listen without immediately fixing or judging, right? You see your child as a separate adult who is navigating their own personal challenges, just like you did at their age. You offer support and encouragement rather than criticism, which strengthens your relationship and their confidence. Let's say you have grandchildren and you disagree with how your adult child disciplines their kids, but you sense you should just respect their parenting choices. The betrayal comes when you make these subtle comments, right? Or you override their decisions when babysitting, right? You just do these subtle things. And then the in-the-box thinking comes, right? Thoughts like, they're too permissive. We raise them better than this. The grandkids need proper discipline. They don't know what they're doing, right? All these thoughts come in, which then in our mind, that child becomes incompetent or ungrateful for your help rather than a parent deserving of respect. So what does out of the box look like? That would look like respecting their role as the parent. You see them as loving parents doing their best with their own approach. You support their authority and offer to help within their guidelines, which builds trust and keeps you involved in the grandchildren's lives, right? Not always easy, but doable, possible. Let's look at some aging parents examples. We're in the mid-season of life, right? We cover all the gamut. That moment, right, that you notice your parent is struggling with something, but you sense you should just let them maintain their dignity and ask if they want help, right? You're observing this in the moment. The betrayal comes because you either take over without asking or you just ignore their struggle entirely, right? You're betraying that first instinct to let them have their dignity. And so then the in-the-box thinking comes. Thoughts like they're being stubborn about their limitations. They're going to hurt themselves. They don't understand how worried we are. And we can justify those thoughts all day long, right? But then we start viewing our parents as difficult, refusing help, instead of someone who is just trying to preserve their autonomy and their dignity, and who is struggling with this aging. We're all going to get there someday, right? We hope that we all can have some compassion in those moments of when our independence changes. So what would an alternative look like? The out of the box would look like we respect their need for independence while offering appropriate support, right? Doesn't mean we don't have conversations, but we see them as a person trying to maintain dignity during a difficult transition. We ask how we can help rather than just assuming what they need, which can preserve that relationship while also ensuring safety. We're going to do things to help create safety as they age, but it has to include seeing them as a person who is navigating this transition. Another example, let's say you feel like you should call your aging parent more often, right? You have this impression that you should call them. The betrayal comes when you let weeks go by without meaningful contact. And then that in-the-box thinking comes, right? Oh, they guilt trip me when I call. They repeat the same stories. They don't understand how busy I am. They have other people they could call, right? All kinds of justifications of why we didn't act on that first sense, right? And then all of a sudden that parent becomes, in our mind, demanding, guilt-inducing, instead of someone who misses connection with their child, someone who loves you, right? The out of the box is viewing them as a person. Let's look at friends, right? Say you have a friend who's going through a difficult time and they've shared that with you. And so you have this impression that you should reach out to them a little more. And then that betrayal comes because you let yourself get busy with your own life and you don't follow up. Because that can happen to all of us, right? It's not about this never happening. It's just noticing when it does, right? And then what do we want to do? So in that moment, we've kind of let it go, that impression go away. And then we have that in the box thinking that's going to justify why we did. They have other friends that support them. They'll reach out if they really need something. I can't be everyone's therapist, right? Justification after justification. And then suddenly our friend becomes this needy or dramatic one in our mind. And so we aren't seeing them as a friend who trusted us with their vulnerability and that they could really use our support, right? Our small gesture of care can deepen that friendship, right? And provide comfort in a difficult time. Now, it does come with parameters and we have to, find a balance, but that initial need or that initial sense, it doesn't have to be big or grandiose. It's like, in what way could I respond to this sense of reaching out, right? What could that look like in this season of my life? And you know that best. But when we totally dismiss it, we do begin to justify why we do that. And then we change our view of somebody else. So the pattern is always the same, right? We have this authentic sense of what we should do for another person. Then we betray that sense. And then we justify our choice by seeing them somehow deserving of our neglect or harsh treatment, right? They're deserving of how we're treating them. So in the box, we justify our behaviors by seeing others as deserving of those behaviors, right? But problems just persist and get worse when we are in the box. Out of the box, you act on your authentic sense of what's right for another person, and you see them as people deserving of consideration. Relationships improve and problems often resolve naturally, right? When we can just respond to that sense. Now, again, it's not that we won't, the goal is to never not get in the box. We get in the box. We're human beings. So we don't have to beat ourselves up about getting that we're in the box, right? It's just about awareness. We want to recognize when we're in the box, and then we have decisions to make, right? So what are the warning signs of being in the box? Well, we ask ourselves some questions. We ask ourselves, am I blaming someone else for this problem? Blaming often puts us in the box, right? All of a sudden it's somebody else's fault, right? Are we making excuses for our own behavior? We're not taking accountability for ourselves and our choices. Puts us in the box. Am I focusing on what's wrong with the other person? Again, we're in the box because now we're not viewing them as a person or a human being. We're viewing them as a problem. Or do I feel like a victim in this situation? If yes is the answer to any of these questions, that is a sign that we are in the box. And we can also ask ourselves, am I more concerned with being right than finding a solution? Right? If I have to be right, then the way I view someone else is an obstacle to overcome, right? So any of those questions can help us kind of sense if we're in the box. And then another way to do it is to check how we feel. When we're in the box, we are often feeling things like frustration. We're also justified, defensive, superior, right? We're looking down at people. That is when we are in the box. Those feelings can give us a sense that we are in the box. When we're out of the box, we're open, we're curious, we're compassionate. We are solution focused, right? And we're humble. In and out of the box. Pay attention to how you feel, what your emotional state is, and that can often be your first clue that you are in the box. So now that we've talked about examples of what it looks like to be in the box and what it would look like if we responded from outside the box, but what do we do when we're in the box and we want to get out of the box? Well, there's some things we've got to learn. We've got to understand this truth. A few things, anyway. You can't get out of the box by trying harder to be right. Right? That doesn't get us out of the box. It just keeps us in there. We can't change other people when we are inside the box. We can't change anybody anyway. But when we're outside the box, we have a different influence. We can invite, by our actions and our behavior of being outside the box, we can invite others to do the same. We can't change other people from inside the box, but we sure can influence them when we are outside the box. And the only way out of the box is to stop justifying why we're inside the box, right? As long as we are justifying, we will be in the box, okay? So awareness and then understanding, we have to take accountability. We have to quit justifying. We can't change other people, and we can't fight to be right or to win. So how do we do it? After we understand this, we recognize we're in the box. What do we do? Well, the first step is to stop and notice, right? Am I in the box right now? We ask ourselves that question and we pay attention to how we feel, or ask some of those other questions, right? We're going to have a good sense of if we're in the box or not. That's really the first question we have to ask ourselves. Am I in the box? The second thing is if I'm in the box, I have to stop seeing the person as an obstacle or a problem to be solved. I have to start seeing the person. I have to start seeing, are they struggling? How are they struggling instead of how are they wrong, right? We have to start seeing them as a person. And then we have to take responsibility and accountability. We have to focus on what we have control over, which is our own behavior. Instead of justifying and finding reasons why we're doing what we are doing or why we didn't do what we first felt like we should do, we take responsibility. My own behaviors. Yeah, I had an instinct to do that. I did that. I chose that. It's not the other person's fault. I made a choice. And then we act on those other impulses that come, right? When you feel like you should help or listen or apologize or have a conversation, just do it. That's how we can help ourselves get out of the box, right? Stop and notice. Am I in the box? How am I feeling? How can I begin seeing the person as a person? How can I take responsibility of my own behaviors? And how can I begin acting on those authentic impulses, right? Those are the steps to get out of the box. And the beautiful thing about when we get out of the box, there is a ripple effect. When you get out of the box, others follow. Relationships improve without you trying to fix the other person. Problems get solved faster when we're not focused on winning or being right. So as we end our time together, I want to offer you a challenge. Over the next 24 hours, I want you to pick one relationship that's been difficult for you lately and focus on getting yourself out of the box and really looking like, how have I been in the box? You're going to stop trying to change them, blame them, or justify why you're in the box. You're going to look at how you have placed yourself in the box and ask yourself, how can I begin seeing them as a person? And then notice what happens when you take responsibility for yourself and you begin seeing people as people. Things change, right? Self-deception is normal, universal. We all do it. It's part of being human. We all experience it. The key is that we will never deceive ourselves. But what do we do when we do? How can we help ourselves do less of it, right? It's a muscle to be strengthened, right? And our boxes aren't about the other people in our life. It's about how we're viewing them. And the small shifts in our perspective can create big, big changes. And the truth is you have more power than you think, but only when you are outside of the box. So that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for listening. And just think about this and remember that the goal isn't perfection, it's awareness. How can I do better tomorrow? How can I do better in the next interaction, right? The next conversation, the next experience. It's just awareness and trying to do those things a little at a time to help us grow into the person we want to be. If you want to share your experience of being in the box and what it's like for you, go to the link in the show notes and let's have a chat and schedule a clarity conversation, and we can work through understanding your box and find ways to help you get outside the box so that you can create beautiful, meaningful, authentic relationships with the people in your life. Until next time, have a beautiful and joyful week.